Thanks for your support of Shabbat Night Live. You know, it's a special day today. We've got Joel Richardson on the stage, and we've got Michael Rood in the back of the room here. And during the break, we were just talking about how Michael was saying, saved from what? Saved from the wrath to come. And we want to talk a little bit more about that. And in the previous segment, we were talking about how we're saved from what, but that hasn't come yet. So we're saved in theory, but the actuality of that has not come yet. So we have to go through this tribulation period, especially folks now in modern times are seeing this. How did church fathers see this, and how should we see this as the tribulation and where we stand and where the rapture happens and all this stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when you hear the sort of discourse between pre-tribbers and post-tribbers these days, pre-tribbers will make fun of post-tribbers and say, you guys are all fear-mongers. You're all about storing up beans and bullets and rice in your basement and building bunkers and this type of thing. And they can make fun of that, but when the time comes, when the storms are here and they don't have rice or beans, then it becomes a different story. But there is some reality to the fact that the modern mind is primarily focused, like the modern Christian mind that believes we will face the tribulation, they're primarily concerned with surviving, with preserving their physical life. And look, that's natural. Like, if you're a dad, you should take care of your family and make sure that you can provide for them in difficult times, etc. And it's normal to not want to die. But when you read the writings of the early church, I don't really like to say the church fathers. That's usually the term that's used for I just say the early church writers.
Yeah, because the church fathers you don't necessarily agree with anyway.
Yeah, exactly. But the same people, we're talking about the same people. But when you look at the way they discuss the tribulation, they speak not so much about trying to save their physical lives. Their primary concern was saving their souls, was preserving their souls. Their primary concern was escaping the tribulation, still being in the faith. They're like, many people will enter the tribulation and fall away. And that's exactly what Jesus said. Many will fall. You can't get around that. You can't get around that statement. And so the idea is, yes, of course we want to try to preserve our lives. I always joke, I have such a big mouth, I'm sure I'll get beheaded within the first few weeks of the tribulation. So that'll be an easy escape, but I'm just kidding. But but my big mouth will get me in, it gets me in trouble now, but wait till the Antichrist gets here. But the point is this, is we need to be thinking, I mean, yes, again, it's okay. If you're a prepper, I think there's wisdom in being prepared and, again, taking care of your family. But the main focus, the main thing that the Bible and the early church writers, their main emphasis was saving their soul, was preserving their faith, was escaping the tribulation, still being a believer. And that's a whole different mentality to the modern, comfortable American Christian mindset. So if we start viewing it that way, we go, okay, this is a whole different thing. I need to be preparing. Yes, it's okay to be preparing over here with ammunition or whatever it is. But the
beans and bullets.
Yeah, beans and bullets. Bullets to protect the beans. So when your neighbors come over and say, hey, neighbor, do you have any beans? You say, no, just kidding. I will kill you. No, but the main issue, forgive my humor, is the main issue is preparing our souls, preparing our hearts. And look, there's only a certain amount that you can, experience is what prepares you. You can't just psych yourself up. But there is something to be said for knowing that something's coming and not being shocked and surprised and confused and disappointed and disillusioned. You know, again, when we promise people repeatedly, don't worry, you will never, ever face this, we are setting them up for the greatest potential failure. And I'm not saying every pre-tribber is going to fall away. That's not the case at all. Look, you can have perfect theology and perfect understanding, but your heart still be twisted. You look at during the Shoah, during the Holocaust, you had, every time I go to Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, the Holocaust Museum, I always take some time they have a display for the righteous Gentiles. I go, if this Bosnian Muslim or this Turkish Muslim did the right thing, like they didn't have right theology, right? But they did the right thing. They risked their lives. They risked the lives of their family to save Jews. I go, if this guy with horrible theology did the right thing, then that says to me that people who have the wrong idea will do the right thing. There'll be many pre-tribbers that once they're in the tribulation, once the Antichrist is here, they'll say, oh, wow, I was lied to. They'll brush themselves off and pick up and serve faithfully. And there'll be post-tribbers that have been preparing and teaching this, and they will fall away. But nevertheless, we still want to teach right doctrine. We want to prepare people. So with regard, again, to those that behaved properly during World War II, there were plenty of people that had bad theology that did the right things, and there were plenty of people that had a good theology about Israel, but they still, rather than doing the right thing, they closed the curtains. They looked the other way. They walked away when their neighbors were being dragged out of their houses and being led away literally to the slaughter. So I just want to be clear. I'm not saying all pre-tribbers are going to fall away. That's not the case. I'm saying the potential is far greater if we have not been taught rightly. And so that's where we are right now.
So how do you see this playing out then? If it's not pre-trib, how do you see this playing out potentially? Not to say that this is the way it is, but I mean, how do you read the Bible and how it reads to you, and like, how does this happen?
Look, every single verse, every single passage in the Bible that talks about the rapture, it integrally connects it to the resurrection and the return of Jesus. Now, you could say that this singular event unfolds over a period of time. It may not necessarily happen all in an hour, an instant. I'm okay with that. His return is just unfolds, that there's some events, but the scriptures clearly frame the rapture, the resurrection, and his return as all being part of the same event. The idea of separating them by 7 years, almost a decade, that's crazy. There is only one coming. Throughout the scriptures, throughout the Old Testament and the New, Yahweh or Yehovah is coming to save his people and execute vengeance against the wicked. He's coming. And then the New Testament, Yeshua, Peter, Paul, John, they all appropriate this language of Yehovah coming in the clouds to save his people in blazing fire with all of his holy ones, and they apply that to the return of Yeshua. And so it's a singular event. The idea of separate, and essentially, regardless, pre-tribbers, whether they admit it or not, teach that there are two more comings. There's only one coming. The coming of our Lord. That is the blessed hope. There's not multiple comings. He doesn't come once to this phantom rapture and call us up, and then almost a decade later, then come in the clouds in glory. There is only one glorious coming in blazing fire with all of his angels. We will be caught up in the clouds to meet him and then escort him back to the earth. The first triumphal entry into Jerusalem, when they went out to meet him and escorted him back into the city. The word there in the Greek is, it's apentisen. I think I have that right. I think I pronounced it right. It's referring to where you go out. It's like a royal reception committee. And that's exactly the way it happened with the first triumphal entry is how it will happen with the ultimate triumphal entry. We will meet him in the clouds and then escort him as he finishes his descent, finishes his coming. He doesn't boomerang and go back up to heaven. So in terms of when it happens, that happens at the end of the tribulation. As Jesus said, Matthew 24:29, after the tribulation. Like, it's crystal clear. after the tribulation of those days. They will see the sign of the Son of Man, etc., etc.
How are we also in churches these days misunderstanding the millennial reign or lack thereof, or what is the proper interpretation of that as you see it?
So, and this is where the church fathers, obviously, the church writers got off because of replacement theology, which has dominated the church throughout most of its history from pretty early on. Again, Gentile arrogance. They reject the idea that Yeshua is going to literally come back and rule and reign on the earth for 1,000 years. And so this is something else, sort of the other half of the body of Christ, those that are reformed, believe in supersessionism or replacement theology. They teach, no, there is no literal millennium. He's just going to come back and we'll enter into the eternal state, so to speak. But the scriptures are clear. As Jesus said, when the Son of Man comes in the glory of his Father, then he will sit on his throne of glory, which is the throne of his father David. The Davidic royal dynasty will be reestablished. Where was the throne of David? It was on Mount Zion. It's not in heaven. He's presently seated at the right hand of the Father. And as it says in Hebrews, what is he doing? Waiting. Waiting until the day comes when he will crush his enemies like grapes, when he will make his enemies a footstool under his feet. He will come back and restore the throne of his father David from Jerusalem. The Torah, the knowledge of God, will go out from Jerusalem. The knowledge of God will cover the earth as the waters cover the sea. The scriptures, not just in the book of Revelation, but throughout the prophets, describe this age that is much better than this present age, but it's still not perfect. And that's what we refer to as the millennial reign of Jesus. It's the transition into the eternal state, but it's a 1,000-year transition, and it's not something to be overlooked.
Do you think that it is overlooked or misunderstood or just put on the shelf, as it were, because if he is going to rule and reign with a rod of iron, what is his standard going to be? Well, you and I know it's the Torah. It always has been. And because of those who are antinomian, or anti-Torah, they just choose to forget that because, well, that can't be, because the Torah was nailed to the cross. It can't be that Yeshua is coming back and ruling 1,000 years according to the Torah.
Yeah.
Is that what it is?
It's a big part of the problem. So, throughout Ezekiel 40 through 48, clearly a temple will be rebuilt. It gives us the blueprint. Sacrifices will be reinstated. And so you get your, again, typical just, evangelical New Testament center. They're going to quote a few statements from Paul, kind of twist them a little bit and say, that's impossible. That would be blasphemy, because he is the once and for all sacrifice for sin. And I go, yes, absolutely. But what they don't realize is there was never atoning sacrifice for sin in the first place. Most Christians have no understanding of the sacrifices, etc. But I'll just throw a curveball. So most of the Christian church, yes, they reject the idea that there will be a messianic Torah during the millennial reign that we will live by. They reject that. But here's the curveball. From the Hebrew roots community that is very Torah focused, there's also this issue, which is there are some changes to Torah. So this is where theologians refer to the Messianic Torah versus the Mosaic Torah. You see it again there in Ezekiel, where some of the sacrifices on Pesach, on Passover, are a little bit different. You see some changes. So yes, there will be Torah. There will be the instructions. There will be the ways of the Lord will be taught. But there's actually some modifications. So that's just an interesting, because people say, the Torah is perfect. And you go, well, if the Torah was perfect and complete, then Yeshua never would have had to come in the first place. It would have been all sufficient. What it means when it says the Torah is perfect is it is perfect in terms of what it was designed for. And so it is not the embodiment of complete perfection. The embodiment of perfection is Yeshua. And during his reign, there will be Torah, will be taught to the Gentiles. There will be a discipleship that will be ongoing. There will be emissaries that go out from Jerusalem teaching and discipling the Gentiles during the millennium. And in the scriptures, the prophets talk about this. And so it's fun to think about, to meditate upon, and get excited about, really, because this is our inheritance. This is why we're laying down our lives. This is why we're embracing the cross. This is why we're making sacrifices, because we're going to inherit something far better. And so I think we should talk about it a lot more.
Yeah, well, let's talk about it. You got me curious now, but now this is not to say that this is going to be a different or a contradictory Torah. This is going to be a Torah completely in harmony with what was given to Moses. It's just maybe expressed differently. Is that what we're saying? Well, what are some of the differences here?
I mean, again, we get hints. We get little clues. And I only throw this out just because it's fun. I don't know all the differences, but
Sure.
you do see some differences. Like, for example, the Passover sacrifices, I don't remember exactly. You know, it's like a ram and a couple goats and a few heifers and this and that. But then when you look in Ezekiel, it's a little bit different. And so you see, again, just glimpses, hints of some variation. And so it just opens up the interesting question. Why? What differences? And so forth. So my point there is not to undermine the beauty of the Mosaic covenant, but just to say there are still some things that we don't fully understand. But yeah, absolutely, there will be Torah. Now, the other interesting discussion is, you go, well, how will that be for those who are in their glorified? We will be in our glorified, eternal, immortal, resurrected bodies versus those in their natural bodies. The overwhelming majority, by the way, of the sacrifices in the temple pertain to ritual temple purity. Like, that's the majority of it, is ritual temple cleanliness, so to speak. And then you have all sorts of other issues. And a big part of them, a big part of the sacrifices during the millennium will continue to pertain to ritual temple purity. Primarily, I would speculate, for those that are still in their natural bodies. We'll be perfect. We'll be sinless. In our glorified immortal bodies, we will no longer wrestle with sin. So how will we relate to the temple versus those in their natural bodies? I'm not entirely sure, but it does make for an interest. And to be honest, it's a discussion that you can't find a lot written about this in academic literature, because it is a bit speculative. But I think it's fascinating.
I think it's fascinating too, because people bring that up as like, there's never going to be sacrifices again. But I say to people, I think some of this world, especially those in organizations like PETA, are going to lose their minds when this happens. And that's how maybe, this all comes down, is because this happens again. And, that's going to really, in a term, separate the sheep from the goats.
Yeah, I love in Isaiah 25, the marriage supper of the Lamb. It says, the new CSB translation, I love the wording. It says, and he will serve choice cuts of meat. And that's at the marriage supper. And so I know, because are you vegan?
I was. I'm a reformed vegan.
Reformed. So I always have to apologize to the vegetarians, choice cuts of meat, and then it says, and fine aged wine, in which case we have to apologize to all the Baptists. But there's going to be but again, we're going to be in our glorified, resurrected bodies, so things will be a little bit different. We won't have to worry about
GMOs, etc.
Yeah, or beer bellies, or this type of thing. But anyway, that's a whole different point. But I'm looking forward to the marriage supper.
Just to see what unfolds, because that sounds very interesting. All right, so Joel, we've got a lot more to talk about. We are going to touch all kinds of sacred cows here, put them to rest. And so would you come back next week? I think we have more here. So
looking forward to it.
All right, thanks. Joel Richardson here on Shabbat Night Live. Thank you for making it happen. We'll see you next week. Until then, Shavua Tov.